Thank you, Wilf, and welcome to this week's Active Travel Cafe, where, as usual, we'll start with our weekly crowdsourced news roundup. And following that, I'm delighted to be welcoming this week's speaker, Thomas Ableman, who's the founder of Freewheeling and a former Director of Strategy at Transport for London. And he's here tonight to talk to us about the Mini Switzerland concept, which he instigated and has received DFT funding. Very exciting project. So we'll hear from Thomas later. But before that, we'll move into our usual sort of news roundup function. So if anybody has any items they'd like to share from where they are, I'm based in Greater Manchester. Some of people have put up where they're based, Wilf, Space Inhaling, Ruth in Chiswick, but it's always good to hear from people around the country, things that are new in your area, or any kind of challenges that you're working on. That can often be a useful thing to share and ask for support from the group. So over to you, Robin.
Thank you. And a couple of things approved just this afternoon in Oxfordshire's cabinet. One is the congestion charge investment plan. So we've had a temporary congestion charge running since the end of October, and this is really the things it can pay for. Mostly it's about buses. There are some things about travel, better cycle parking, and some junction improvements. Would be keen to see what they actually deliver. But the big one is the other policy approved, which is quiet lanes. So that's essentially taking duplicate roads, and the policy is very bold and full in that it requires them both to be filtered and to reduce traffic and traffic speed. So they're not like the quiet lane signs that you've seen, which are really only partly effective. And we think it's a great policy. Councillor Emily Kerr, who some of you may know on social media, has been a big driver of this. I'm very pleased to have taken her through one of the early quiet lanes that have been there for decades, which may have helped to spur this process on. And all of them, a bit like our 20 approach, Oxfordshire's approach to 20 miles an hour, the proposals have to come from a parish council and be supported by the local or county councillor. So they're very locally driven. And it's good. They've got £250,000 for up to 10 pilots. We're very much looking forward to it, and maybe we'll come back in a year or two and tell you how it's gone.
That would be brilliant, Robin. That sounds really interesting. Matthew in Darlington.
Hello there. Thanks very much. Just kind of reporting back from School Street's North conference, which was in Liverpool, near the Albert Dock. It was really interesting conference. I don't go to loads and loads of conferences. I can't afford to. But what I've noticed at this conference is there's certainly been a shift in the last few years. When I first started getting involved with active travel, you'd quite often have speakers saying, "I've got the one solution. I've got, kind of this. We need to do this thing. This one thing will solve everything." But there was very much. We had presenters from Liverpool region, from West Midlands, and all over the country, London as well. There was very much a very strong buy-in that there has to be. We have to be picking from all of the menu of interventions, and locking the pieces of the jigsaw together. And what I was also really pleased was that kind of the suggestion to look at this, not take it out of the hands of engineers, because obviously we need those, but from a public health point of view, active travel is far easier to sell when you've got public health professionals on your side. So I know around the country there are many campaign groups doing this as well. In Darlington, we've got our Director of Public Health who's over the moon that we're looking at a health in all policies framework where we look at every policy our local authority and regional authority do, and is public health explicitly mentioned in those policies, and that really does change the tipping point. But the final point I made in the plenary session was all around the country there are campaign groups, there are local authorities, there are great councillors having to evidence and argue that we need to intervene in the way the public realm is built and accessed by all people. But it'd be mad to say, Liverpool has a different drink drive limit, or West Midlands doesn't have a seatbelt law. What we need is an assessment of roads and the way they on a use case basis. So this road is used by these people for this thing, therefore it is designed differently from this road over here. Time and again, engineers reach for manual for streets and design for the expeditious passage and repassage of traffic, by which they mean cars going brum brum. And there was a really groundswell for a plea to lobby national government to have a reclassification of roads on use case scenario, so that we have a safer, more inclusive highway network from the ground up, from the Dolomite up, shall we say. So it was really, really positive conference, and I know slides are probably available by whatever means you can get hold of them. If anyone's desperate to see them, I've got copies. So brilliant, great stuff.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, it's always good to have a report back from a conference as well. So feel free to do that in your updates if people have them. Mark and Brighton.
Sorry, I was looking at the chat and I couldn't get it off screen quickly enough. So two things. One is a report back from another conference, which was the London Walking Festival on Friday last week. And it was quite fun because there was a panel which was James McCash, who's the new Green leader of Southwark, Rowena Champion, who's the Labour leader of Islington, and Andrew Gilligan, who some of us may remember from his time. And he was basically blaming Wales Labour Party losing in Wales on the 20-mile-an-hour limit, which I think got everyone else yelling at him. No, there were lots of other things on there. So yeah, I think there may have been a couple of people here who went to it, but it was an interesting one. But I wanted to ask a question just on gullies. Brighton's just agreed, or going to Cabinet this week to agree the use of EV charging gullies in pavements. And my gut feeling is I don't like them, but it's just more motor normative footway changes. But I haven't really got any evidence. So if anyone's got any ideas or feedback from their areas, if they've used them, it would be really good to know.
Yes, they do seem to be becoming default, don't they? But I've not seen a specific policy on those. So if anyone has that would be great. Thank you, Mark. Maybe one for a future session as well. Tim.
Just on Mark's point, I work with tenants groups around the country, and one of which is in Watford, and we were looking at EV chargers and trailing cables from the house to the car park on the other side of the estate, that sort of thing. And it's a county council policy because they're the highways authority and stuff like that. So I'll dig that out, Mark, and see what else I've got. I did a little bit of research on that. What I was going to say was I've just noticed on LinkedIn, probably 4 days late, that Danny Williams is leaving the Department for Transport. He helped to set up ATE, and he's going to pastures new. He's been a speaker on here, I believe, when he was going off to do the integrated transport strategy, which has been renamed Better Connected. So he's obviously fulfilled 2 tasks, and he's off to his next setting. And none of my local MPs resigned to force a leadership change. But that'll do.
Are you trying to stitch me up, Tim? Yes, and on the Danny Williams piece, that's a really nice segue back to me, because Danny will be our main speaker on Active Travel Cafe at the next session, which isn't next week because we're on a half term, but Danny will be joining us the week after, which is the 3rd of June, I'm going to say, whatever that Tuesday is. So yeah, look out for the email on that one, but delighted that Danny will be joining us, probably doing a bit of reflecting and a bit of looking ahead to what's next for him. Any other updates? A bit of chat in the chat about the parking infrastructure. H, do you have an update?
Yeah, am I back in? I'm in, yeah?
Yep.
Good. Just to catch up with something that's going on in the Peak District. Back in 1996, we had a complete gazetteer with walks and cycle routes, and when we went and did the bikes on buses in the Peak District, which was 1996, and Mark may remember the attempt to do something in Brighton as well. John Young with Stagecoach is pushing this, but we've also got pushing in to try and get bikes carried on the buses, and using some of the heritage lines up to Matlock to get people in and out without the cars. Because I think, if we can try and get people into the Peak District, possibly even paying an entrance fee, which gives them unlimited access to the buses and trains. This is what was going on in the Lake District 30 years ago. And so I'm wondering whether we can sort of infect the rest of the country in the national park.
Well, I think we're probably preempting potentially Thomas's talk, because he's going to talk about mini Switzerland. So I think, well, thanks for the point, H, and I think that will probably come up in the discussion after his talk. James. Oh no, sorry, James is in the waiting room. He's not got his hand up. Has anyone else got a news update to share? Otherwise, I will bring that section to a pause. Do feel free to post anything in the chat if you think of anything that would be useful. And no, it looks like we're time to move on. So Thomas, I would like to welcome you now. So as I said at the beginning, Thomas Ableman is our main speaker this week. He's got a few slides which he'll pop up now. And Thomas is the founder of Freewheeling. He was the former director of strategy at Transport for London. And he's the instigator of something called Mini Switzerland, which the DFT have funded to be a national demonstrator, which sounds very exciting. So Thomas, how are you getting on with those slides? Brilliant, there they are.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. So, as you said, up until 2 years ago, I was Director of Strategy and Innovation at Transport for London. I also spent 7 years as Commercial Director of Chiltern Railways, which, if anyone wants to have the debate, I will argue until I'm blue in the face that it was the most innovative and entrepreneurial rail operator of the privatisation era, though I do admit that's not a massively challenging sample in which to be part of, but I will still, that's the hill I will die on. And for the intervening 5 years between the two, I was the founder of a startup called Snap, which was basically a digital marketplace platform for coach travel, Uber for coaches in effect. And I now lead Freewheeling, which enables transport change makers. So this is about Mini Switzerland. The concept originated in this place just over a year ago, Easter 2025. I went on a holiday with my daughter to Paschpels, which is this village in Graubünden in South Switzerland. It has a population of 475 people. It also has a bus service, and it has a bus service that runs every hour. And one of the interesting things, you can see a few interesting things about this bus service. The first is, if you look very closely, you can see there are people on the buses. It's quite well used. Another thing is you can see people waiting for the bus going in the other direction because the buses are relatively frequent. The bus goes every hour from Paschpels to, in one direction, Rothenbrunnen, where there's a railway station, and in the other direction to Thusis, which is where we went. Now, there's the bus having arrived at Thusis station. If you imagine now, I pivot on my heels, I don't move, so there's the bus, pivot round, there's the train. So I'm standing in the same place, so you're looking through to the bus just there, you walk into the building, and there's the train. The bus arrives at 59 minutes past every hour from Paschpels. And as you can see on the screen there, the train to the nearest city, the regional capital, Kur, leaves at 2 minutes past the hour. So a 3-minute connection from bus to train, which means that you can get from Paschpels, population 475 people, to Kur, the regional capital, in 45 minutes every single hour. Now, actually, it's slightly cleverer than that because the bus also goes to Rothenbrunnen in the other direction and can connect there as well. And therefore, it's actually 45 minutes every half hour, but never mind. The normal model is every hour. And every village in Switzerland with a population of 300 people or more has a bus to the nearest station, which is perfectly timed to meet the train. And the train goes to the nearest major town or city. I kind of think of Switzerland as being like this sort of enormous beast breathing. Every hour it breathes in, and the buses go in from the villages, into the towns, connect into the cities, etc., etc. And then every hour it breathes out, and the trains go out from the cities to the towns, connect there to the villages, connect there to the buses, out into the hamlets. And that's how it works. So everywhere is connected to everywhere else. And the result of that, if you can see on the left, there is the number of train trips made in Switzerland every year, and you can see that it's about double the number on the right-hand side, which is the UK in red. The other thing you notice is that it's a bigger number than before COVID, not a smaller number. It is possible that it can continue to grow. And the big bar in the middle, we don't measure it quite in the same way here, but is the number of journeys made by public transport in Switzerland. And every year, the average Swiss make 200 public transport journeys every year, despite the fact Switzerland is actually a relatively rural country. And it's blissful. I don't drive. So every journey I make is by public transport or active travel. And Switzerland is one of the few places where I, as a non-driver, feel exactly that same sense of freedom that car drivers take for granted in rural areas. So as always, I thought to myself, why can't we do that in England? And as always, I've been to Switzerland many times, the answer is, well, it's just too difficult. Our institutional structure doesn't work for it. Our competition law is different. We have a highly fragmented public transport sector. I mean, everything is hard to make this work. But then I had an idea, and the idea was Mini Switzerland. And this idea was inspired entirely by where I live. So I live in Walthamstow in northeast London. And that photograph is one of the most famous photographs in the active travel community. It is of Orford Road. My road, Beulah Road, is at the very end. You can see that big tree at the end there. Turn right, my house is just there. And so I go down this road every day. And this road has been transformed as a result of a project 12 years ago called Mini Holland. And one of the very few good things Boris Johnson ever did is he funded a couple of areas to become Mini Hollands, i.e. to say, the Netherlands is really good at active travel. Let's take one place and become really good at this stuff there in that one place and demonstrate what is possible. That was what Mini Holland was. So there were now bike lanes on pretty much every main road. Here's an example. This is a typical South London suburb. This is Bexley in southeast London. As you can see, there's a handful of bike lanes here and there. It's not really a network. Here's Walthamstow, where I now live, and there's bike lanes literally on every significant road. So if we can create a sort of local demonstrator of what is possible by learning from one European country in the world of active travel, why can't we do the same in the world of public transport integration? So when I got back, I wrote this LinkedIn post saying, why didn't we do a Mini Switzerland, and which area would like to partner with me to create this? And it clearly got some interest, because by my standards, 35,000 is viral. I know other people, if you're a Kardashian, it's probably not very good, but by my standards, that is a viral post. It really captured people's imagination. And a group called Hope Valley Climate Action got in touch to say, we would love to partner with you to create this. So I went up to Hope, and what a great place to do this, Hope, and met with Hope Valley Climate Action. And we're like, yep, brilliant, we can work together. So we then formed a little voluntary team to create Mini Switzerland. The first thing we did is get a small grant from the Foundation for Integrated Transport to hire a transport planner so we could do the timetabling bit, which is a long, complex piece of work. Everything else was done by this group of people, which is the little voluntary team that we put together. So I've not been paid anything for Mini Switzerland. I've done it entirely as a volunteer. Everyone involved has done it entirely as a volunteer, with the exception of the transport planner we hired, who worked last summer and has continued as a volunteer ever since. So this is very much a bottom-up initiative created by a mixture of the locals of Hope Valley Climate Action and a voluntary team of public transport professionals. And the people on that chart are about half and half. And what we were trying to create is basically this mini version of Switzerland. So we want fully integrated bus and rail timetables in Switzerland. As you saw in Pashpels, the buses meet the trains, the train meets the bus every hour. That's absolutely core to the proposition. We want integrated bus and rail ticketing, because again, in Switzerland, everyone has the same app. You can buy a ticket from every bus stop in Switzerland to every other bus stop in Switzerland, and it will automatically give you the cheapest and most appropriate fare. You never have to think about connections. It just does it all for you. We want properly integrated bus and rail interchanges. In the Hope Valley, lots of examples of interchanges where even just basic stuff like there's a road outside the station and there's no signalized crossing, so you can't get to the bus stop on the opposite side. Every service running every hour, that's absolutely core to the Swiss proposition. You know that the bus stop outside your house has a bus at 12 minutes past the hour every day without exception, and you just don't have to think about it. If you want to travel, you leave at 12 minutes past the hour, and because of the seamless connectivity, that is your gateway to everywhere in the country. It needs exceptional punctuality because everything has got to connect together. And I think this sense of pride is really important. When a few years ago, I visited Swiss Railways in Bern, and I was talking to their head of strategy, and I said, Swiss Railways has no competition. Yeah, why are you so good? And he kind of pondered for a minute and said, pride. And I think that sense that we can do something that's really good is very important. So this is the current network in the Hope Valley. One really important point here is that there are buses, and there's quite a lot of buses in the Hope Valley. Like most rural areas, we are a country that does fund bus services, not as many as we'd like, and we do fund rail services. But we do not make the most of them because there's not enough. They don't run at the right times, they don't connect. And so you end up with very low numbers of people using them, basically as a sort of stopgap for the people who have no other option, which is a real shame. So if you look at the key there, the reds are the ones that run every hour, and there's almost none that run every hour. This is the proposition that we want to offer with Mini Switzerland, where all of the core network runs every hour, and the rest run every 2 hours, all to very predictable times, all connecting in with rail at 2 key hubs. Oh, sorry, I need to skip that. So this is a diagram that shows the effect of this. So the railway line through Hope Valley connects Manchester and Sheffield. Therefore, if you live in the Hope Valley, you should have a really easy journey to or from Manchester or Sheffield. So the left hand is the status quo at the moment, showing as an example, the afternoon journeys from Manchester to Bradwell in the Hope Valley. And as you can see, brilliant. There's an hourly train service. Fantastic. Isn't that great? However, the vast majority of hours, there is literally no bus to take you the last few miles from the station to Bradwell. Where there is a bus, you typically have to wait 15 minutes, 8 minutes, 16 minutes, 42 minutes. You can't rely on that service as a way of getting to Bradwell, and it takes far longer than it needs to. The right-hand side is the proposed Mini Switzerland timetable. And as you can see, in almost every hour up until late evening, you get off the train, and there's a bus waiting to take you. And therefore, the whole journey from the centre of Manchester to the centre of the village of Bradwell can be done in 1 hour. And that is typical of the connectivity that will be available in the Hope Valley from both in Manchester and Sheffield. I'm being persecuted by the most persistent blue bottle, by the way. I've no idea if you can see it, but it is the most determined creature I've ever encountered. So in February, we published this report, which describes the work that we had done as a voluntary team and what we would like to see created as a demonstrator. And it's really important that this is not about Hope Valley. This is about making something like Mini Holland did that everyone can come and learn from. Yeah, how do we make this work? Lots of questions we didn't know the answer to. So we need to figure out how to make it work in one place. If you would like to read the report, then there's a QR code there. So feel free to scan that and have a look for yourself. And the report describes, the service proposition, ticketing, how the Swiss model works, how we want to replicate it in the UK. But as I say, very much as a demonstrator project. So we did that in February, and then in April, the DfT published Better Connected, which is the strategy for integrated transport. And I'm thrilled to say that they provided £6 million worth of funding to make the demonstrator a reality. That was backed up by East Midlands County Combined Authority, who also funded it with £6 million. So a total budget of £12 million over the course of the next 3 years. Now, one thing I will always keep saying to anyone who'll listen is we believe this should be a 5-year project, not a 3-year project, because this is a major behaviour change project. It takes a lot of time for people to have confidence in this kind of thing. So I'm in a slightly odd position now, being a bit like a kind of dad handing over my kids to the university, because this is now East Midlands County Combined Authority's project, not mine. I initiated it with Hope Valley Climate Action, but they will now take this forward and deliver it. I hope, I don't know this for certain, I hope that it will be delivered this time next year. I believe it should be possible to do in 1 year. It makes sense to do it at the start of the tourist season. So if it's not this year, then it will be, if it's not 27, it'll be 28, but I hope it is 2027. That's the end of that bit. I'm just going to finally and shamelessly do a quick plug for the fact that I do a weekly blog and podcast on various transport matters. So if you are interested in that, then feel free to scan that QR code as well and subscribe. I do a podcast on Thursdays and a blog on Mondays. And then finally, my very last QR code. Every day, I do a very short 40-second long email for transport change makers giving tips and advice. So again, if you want to scan that and subscribe to that, then you would be extremely welcome to do so. But that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Thomas. That is really interesting. And there are a few questions in the Q&A, which I'll go to in a minute. But before I do that, I wanted to just check something with you in terms of what happens on the continent, and it's often we look over there, with jealous eyes about what's possible. And is it the case that it's what is it that do you see that essentially enables their more integrated approach? I have read that the kind of devolved approach to the democratic system means that local areas are more able to plan their own transport. But I think I read somewhere that in Germany, even the local constitutions include a kind of, your local council will say what you get for your council tax equivalent, and one of those things would be a bus service every hour from where you live or whatever. What do you perceive to be the reason why we've managed the countries on the continent have managed this more easily than we have?
I mean, you're absolutely right. That devolution point, I mean, for them, it's not devolution because, of course, if you're German or if you are Swiss, then the state or the canton, as they call it in Switzerland, is the core political unit. And power by constitution is pushed upwards, is devolved upwards to federal level. But if it's not, by default, it's exercised locally, which is the exact opposite of the situation here, where by default it sits with Parliament. And so you do have very empowered local leaders who are able to control all of their transport. They didn't do what we did. We kind of had this weird thing in the UK where if you go back, we used to have integrated transport back in the 60s. And then of buses and trams. Then in the 70s, someone had the really good idea of bringing trains into that. And so we'd closed all the trams by the 50s, but we still had buses. And then in the 70s, we brought trains into that through passenger transport executives in the major cities. Great, that's a good idea. And then just as we'd done that in the 80s, we deregulated the buses. So now we disintegrated the buses, having just integrated the trains into them. And then in the 90s, we privatized the trains. And so the whole thing kind of collapsed. And that's where we've been ever since. They just have the assumption that transport is planned by the public sector, funded by the public sector, and delivered often under contract by the public sector. Switzerland is particularly special, though, because what they have is this really clear culture of long-term planning of the timetable. So I was in Bern 2 weeks ago with the Swiss State Railways team, talking to them about the 2050 timetable that they're currently planning. And so they are currently planning the train-by-train timetable for 2050. The whole country can then work out their integration model into that timetable, what investments they need to make. And if there's a station that becomes a really good integration hub, they've got literally decades to put in place all the infrastructure in a nice measured sequence to be ready for that timetable to operate.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. Jamie's got his hand up. Jamie, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you. That was really great, Thomas. Thanks. And I can confirm I was there. I was in Hope 2 weeks ago. 4 brothers came from different parts of the country by train, by public transport. None of us owned cars, and we had a fantastic time. And what I particularly liked about it was the rail access between the 2 major cities meant that there was a lot of diversity on the hills, on the walking routes that you don't otherwise see often in the English countryside. That was fantastic. And you're absolutely right. The buses didn't link up with the trains whatsoever. So obviously it's all brilliant. I agree entirely. What I'm interested in is what your feedback has been so far from the bus companies coming up with this radical suggestion that they might turn up when the trains arrive. I know it's out of your hands now, but it'd just be interesting to know what that feedback is. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean the bus companies have been really positive. Yeah, they want to do this. I mean, no one wants to do stupid stuff. No one comes to work to be an idiot. And a big part of the problem is that a integrated bus timetable is less efficient than a non-integrated bus timetable for two reasons. The first is that it has to wait at the train station for connections, and so that makes the journey time longer. And the second is that it then has to wait at the turnaround in order for the right time to leave in order to hit the station at the right time for the train on its way back. And that generally means it was waiting for longer than it needs to. So you've got two sources of inefficiency there, which probably means you need more buses in the circuit than you would otherwise need. So it just costs more. So they, as individual commercial businesses, are not going to fund these services unless someone pays them to do it, because they can't afford to do it. So they would love to do it, but it's not a commercial proposition. So then you have, okay, well, couldn't the state have just done this? Why did I need to do anything? And the answer is in part just because we don't do this. County councils, up until East Midlands Combined Authority was created, these services were the publicly specified services were contracted by Derbyshire County Council. It's a very small authority. It's had funding cuts. It hasn't got many people, and they don't have the resources remotely to do this now, and hadn't really got the ambition to try to find the resources to do it, because they've just been sort of, ground down by the sense of what is possible during austerity. And so I think part of this is just, and a lot of what I do in my day job is just about giving the confidence back that we can try things like this.
Thank you.
And just before I bring in another couple of questions, to clarify, of the 12 million, Thomas, is a lot of that essentially to pay the bus companies to put on extra services?
Yeah, by far the biggest cost will be physical buses and drivers to drive those buses. Now, I think it's really important that this does not become, therefore, a bus project. There are a whole series of integrated projects that this needs to be. So there is obviously a bus contracting project, which includes a timetabling project. There is also a fares and ticketing project. There is also a physical integration and infrastructure project. There is also a behaviour change and communication project. There is also a data and evaluation project. And all of those need to happen simultaneously, and they are highly codependent, but it can't just be a bus contracting project.
Thank you. Mark, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, well, I put part of it in the Q&A, which is that Alistair Kirkbride, who's based in Staveley in the Lake District, has done some similar research in Churchill Fellowship, looking at places. Are you in touch with him? And the other half is another body to be in touch with. My partner used to work for National Parks England, and therefore I know about the Peak District National Park, and it's the most, because of the Manchester and Sheffield issues, it is indeed, as Jamie said, the most diverse visitorship of any national park in the country. Certainly got the most ethnic minority visitors who don't go because they feel a bit concerned what they'll find. So are you talking to both the national park and also people who might be in those groups in Manchester and Sheffield in particular, who might be encouraged into the countryside?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are both really important points. So we have spoken to the National Park. The National Park have been hugely positive about this. Manchester and Sheffield are so important as stakeholders for this project. And that's now this is an East Midlands County Combined Authority project. That's a real opportunity. So we've been talking to them about how we can integrate with Greater Manchester and South Yorkshire, both at an officer level, but also at a political level. The Peak Partnership exists between those three mayors. Therefore, that feels like a real opportunity because, as you rightly say, an awful lot of the users of this are going to be residents of Manchester and Sheffield. Those cities both have about a third of their population without access to a car. So a third of the population do not have access to all of those green and blue spaces of the Peak District that suddenly will become opened up to them by this project. And that is a triple win. It's a win for the people of South Yorkshire and Greater Manchester, and especially that third. It's a win for the people of the Peak District who no longer have cars blocking up their driveways when people in the 66% shift mode. And it's a win for the people in the Peak District when the 33% boost the visitor economy without adding to congestion. So engaging Greater Manchester and South Yorkshire is a key priority that we are hoping and encouraging that will happen as part of this project.
Thank you. Liz, before I bring you in, I'll just ask one from the chat so we mix it up. Thomas, Bev has asked, and I'll combine this with another one a little bit. So Bev has asked about kind of wriggle room for connections. Like 3 minutes sounded maybe a bit quick to get from one to the other, especially with our non-integrated interchanges that we currently have. And Shan also wanted to make the point about potentially linking with sort of more cafes, pubs, community spaces as places that people potentially like to wait as somewhere warm with perhaps a bit more facilities, especially in rural areas. Would you take those? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're not planning 3-minute connections as part of this project. I don't think the British can cope with that. Our spaces don't cope with that. As you saw in the photograph I illustrated from Watson's, it is super connected. You literally step off the bus onto the platform and you can do that effortlessly in 3 minutes. None of the stations in the Hope Valley have that level of connectivity. And again, I don't want to distress everyone by their long-term thinking, but the Swiss have been on a 40-year program to rebuild all of their rural stations to enable bus and rail connectivity, and an awful lot of them they've actually what I showed you there was a comparatively poor quality example, because in a lot of them you have the platform with the train on one side and the bus on the other side. You literally just step off the train, walk across the platform, and get onto the bus. We haven't got the benefit of 40 years of investment in that kind of rebuilding, so we have to do it in a more slowly. However, we do want the connections to be as short as possible. The timetables we've created were created for purposes of planning the project. Obviously, the timetables that East Midlands Combined Authority create will not be the ones that we have necessarily used. But the principle is the shortest possible connection time that works for the site, and what that will be will depend on things like, can you put in signalised crossings, and what are the cycle times of those crossings at stations. In terms of connecting from train to bus, one of the principles needs to be that the bus waits, as it would in Switzerland. So you don't get off the train and the bus pulls away. And that creates all kinds of interesting questions around, how does the bus driver know that the train's late? They're not allowed to use a mobile phone in the cab. Can they see it? If they can't see it, how do they find out? So all those problems have got to be solved through this project. It is unlikely that trains will wait for buses. That way round is much less likely to work. So there will sometimes be misconnections, and that's where the warm waiting room points comes in, which I think is a really interesting one. In general, the operating principle of this is you shouldn't need a really nice place to wait at the station, because you're going to be just shifting quite quickly through. But there will occasionally be times.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks for waiting.
Thanks. So you answered one of my questions in your previous answer about South Yorkshire and Manchester. I'm really excited about the project as a non-car owning resident of Sheffield who's really committed to walking in the Peak District.
You are my person for this. This is for you.
I'm so happy. So one question I had was about capacity, particularly on buses. I mean, previously I've waited for a bus in the Peak District on a sunny bank holiday Monday and found it go straight past because it's full, which was, as they were only once an hour, it was very annoying. Ended up walking home. And secondly, I was wondering about disabled access. Obviously, the train stations are not set up for that. You partly answered that earlier. I was also wondering about bikes on buses, which would be really nice, but probably isn't the first priority. So those sorts of questions about some of the extras we might enjoy. Thank you.
No, absolutely right. And I think they're all really good examples. And one of the reasons why I'm so keen this is a mini Switzerland project as opposed to a rural integration project, which we could call it, is because it inspires us to keep learning from Switzerland. So what will be possible on day one might not be possible. What's possible on the final day, and hence why they weren't all listed in that slide I showed you about what our ambitions are for the project when it launches. But for example, I have been in Switzerland waiting for an hourly rural bus service that drove straight past me because it was full. The difference is there was another one a minute behind because they put a duplicate on to make sure that everyone was carried. That's what they do in that situation. Yes, the vast majority of rural buses in Switzerland have bike racks on the back, so you just hook your bike onto the back and off you go. Again, we're not trying to achieve that on day one for this project, but it's worth having that inspiration in mind.
Liz, did you want to come back on that?
No, that was marvelous. Oh, well, I suppose there was the disability. Is there any issue?
Oh, yes, apologies. Yeah. No, very helpfully, and not entirely coincidentally, but they are separate projects. East Midlands have also funded a station access project to Hope Station. So that will all come together at the same time, though that will probably take longer to deliver than this will.
Thank you. Roger.
Yeah, thanks. Fantastic presentation, very inspiring. Really, really hope this comes off. A couple of questions, both of which follow on from some of the things being raised and in other questions. Just on this, firstly, on the point about connection times. What is punctuality like on the local buses and the local rail at present? Will it need to be improved in order for this to work? And if so, is that part of the plan? The second is about the sort of the kind of political arrangements. Now, this only occurred to me when you mentioned this is the East Midlands Combined Authority who are taking on this project, and yet you then mentioned that it needs to integrate with rail services in Greater Manchester and in South Yorkshire. All of which, both of which could potentially be pitching in to run regional rail services in the not very distant future under the various arrangements of the integrated transport under the Better Connected Transport Strategy. So I'd be interested to know whether, I guess this relates to your point that 3 years might not be long enough, because so much else might change in terms of what those other two adjoining combined authorities might be doing with regional services over that timescale. Please comment. I'm not sure what the question is there, but please comment on that kind of connection between the other two adjoining combined authorities and where this might go.
No, it's absolutely right. On the first point, no, the services are not reliable enough at the moment. So it is absolutely essential that is addressed. Obviously, the bus services, we have the opportunity of completely fresh timetables and a much stronger commitment to what this service proposition is. All of the operators of all of the bus services and the rail service all were signed up as supporters, and their names are on the document. So they know what they need to do. Northern are the operator of that line. They absolutely acknowledge that historically the service has not been good enough. They've put effort into it. It is getting better at the moment. So I can't promise it will become Swiss standard, because it won't, but it will become better than it is now. I am confident of that. The combined authority sort of jigsaw is really interesting. Hope Valley is in East Midlands, but has almost no relationship with the rest of the East Midlands. No one goes to Nottingham or Derby from Hope Valley. They go to Manchester or Sheffield. And so this kind of problem is going to become greater as more and more places develop their own integrated transport propositions. So in many ways, this is a great place to do it, because if we can solve it here, we can solve it anywhere, but it is also very complicated. In terms of the most challenging aspect is the ticketing, because that's far more complicated. The timetabling information already can be made relatively integrated without needing to integrate with both. Both Sheffield and Manchester are introducing contactless payment card systems. So the gold standard would be that you touch your card in at the reader on the bus in the Hope Valley, and you touch out in either Sheffield or Manchester, and it integrates with whichever system you touched out as part of an integrated fare. And effectively, you have two overlapping zones in the Hope Valley, and it's part of both Sheffield and Manchester, depending on where you end up. The other thing that I'm personally very keen on is the FareTick proposition. So FareTick are the Swiss company that developed EasyRide. EasyRide is an app-based system used now for 1 in 5 journeys in Switzerland. You simply tap the app at the start of the journey, you put your phone back in your pocket, you never touch it again, and it tracks you throughout the rest of the day. Any train, any tram, any bus, any ferry you travel on, it knows that you did it. And at the end of the day, it just debits the cheapest fare for the journeys that you made. And that doesn't require any physical infrastructure on the ground, doesn't require any readers. It's all done using GPS. And that means that you can have a fully integrated proposition without needing to deal with physical infrastructure and physical install. And it's a really simple proposition for the customer. So I'd quite like to see a solution like that put in place. And Denmark, by the way, are now rolling out the FareTick digital proposition for the entire country as the core solution for everyone, for every operator in the whole of Denmark.
I'm going to come in with a couple of questions, Thomas. As a heavy user of the aforementioned railway line, non-car owner in Manchester here, brilliant to access. I've used every single train station along there to plan walks and access. One question was about the trains and whether you think that is there any scope within the 3-year project to influence the train services, an extra stopping service an hour or anything like that? Because that is a barrier to in terms of frequency. And then in terms of bus, you mentioned sort of longevity of services into the evening, but I think I'm right. Certainly in most of Derbyshire, there are basically no buses on Sundays, which I've found a big problem. And also in terms of your monitoring and evaluation point, I assume you'll be looking to prove the benefits of this. I think it's a hindrance to tourism because I would have stayed overnight in the area, but I don't because I come back to Manchester because I can't get a bus on a Sunday. So, yeah, any opportunity for more train services in the 3-year project, do you think? And secondly, buses on Sundays, am I right that that's a big barrier as well? And will your project address that, do you think?
So in terms of extra train services, no, it's not part of the scope of this project. I hear different things as to whether a half-hourly service in the Hope Valley is possible. Some people say it is possible. Some people say it is not possible. And everyone says Northern haven't got enough carriages to make it work anyway. So in the short term, it is not going to happen, and it's not something we are seeking, and it's not something this project depends on. The core proposition is an hourly service. And actually, if you have an hourly service and the buses connect to it, that's still a great accessibility proposition compared to where we are now. In terms of Sunday, absolutely. And again, this is where calling this mini Switzerland is so important, because you have the comparative with what the Swiss do. In Switzerland, there is one timetable which operates every single day, 365 days of the year, including Christmas Day, without variance.
Yes, that would be amazing. Thank you for taking those. We'll go back to the Q&A and see who we've got to come in. Jill in Manchester asking, superb project, wish every success. Will there be somewhere to securely leave bikes when catching the bus? Somebody else has asked about buses on bikes, but bike storage is a question essentially.
We had quite a debate about this as to whether we were going to look at active travel as part of this. Hope Valley Climate Action have a significant active travel program at the moment, and in the end we decided to keep those as totally separate projects and not try to tie them together. So there might be stuff that happens because they are doing separate stuff with active travel, but we deliberately didn't want. It's down landed on my nose. Oh, way.
I have been monitoring this fly, and it is very persistent. Yes,
it's incredibly persistent. And whenever you don't see it, it's because it's crawling around my screen. So we deliberately took a decision not to try to do more than we that felt realistic, and therefore there is active travel stuff happening. There is this happening, but we're not tying them together.
Yeah, keep them aligned, but not overlapping. Cameron in the chat, Cameron from Buxton. So I don't know, Cameron, if you want to come in at all to make any further points, but Cameron's question in the chat is, how will future learnings from this pilot be utilised in the future decisions on funding? Will this help inform Treasury on the wider benefits of this sort of investment? And Cameron, if you want to come in as a Derbyshire resident, then please do.
Yeah, I listened to your presentation on green signals actually, and so I get the gist with this. But do you know how those learnings will be made? And also, second question is do you think there's any opportunity to extend the pilot if the funds are still sufficient? Because I remember you saying that the funds that have been allotted are quite large, really, for sorry, I'm not on video, for the project. So I just wondered if.
No, I hope that funds can be made available for a full 5-year period. Now, almost nothing is funded in the UK for 5 years. Therefore, I think we have to be realistic that they will take a period of time for that to happen. But I'm very keen for it to happen. In terms of persuading the Treasury, I really hope that they are watching this carefully. The evaluation piece is really important. Transport Focus have offered to support with that, which I'm really glad about. And therefore, we've got sort of the official transport data collector supporting with transport data collection for this. The other thing that I think is really important is I don't want this to be a one-off. So obviously, as a voluntary team, we've put a lot of effort into Hope Valley, but Hope Valley is only one place. So we're talking to other local authorities about whether other places would like to do mini Switzerlands that have different challenges, different opportunities, and therefore we can learn different things. It's a valley, that's nice and Swiss, which is great. But some people say, well, a valley is kind of easier because you've got hills providing a kind of natural bound and a natural zone. So some of the places we're talking to have different geographic and demographic situations. Obviously, we can't go to DFT and seek £6 million out of the Better Connected strategy for each other place. But are there other local authorities, other places that would like to find their own funding to try to do something that looks like this, and we can have a suite of mini Switzerland demonstrators all testing slightly different circumstances. So that's certainly what I would like to see.
That's great, thanks.
Thomas, James has asked, what about cycle hire? And actually this ties into a thought I had, again, as sort of heavy user of the line. Almost every station is one of those stations that was built miles away from where the actual people lived. Well, not miles away, but Grindleford station not by the centre, Edale station not by the main pub, Hope a bit away from. Is there an opportunity not just to think about buses as the way to connect, but smaller micromobility, e-bikes, shared micromobility, to make those shorter connections, because the stations aren't the integrated ones that you were showing us in Switzerland?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of comes back to my point earlier. I think 100% there is, and it's a great idea, but it's not what we're doing through this project just to avoid scope creep. We'd rather focus on two modes, bus and train, and try and get those right. But in principle, completely agree.
Thank you. I'll click through a few more. Tim Morton says, what's the Wi-Fi coverage like in the Hope Valley? Not sure whether that's just a general travel question, Tim, but I assume it's quite important for powering apps and things.
Yeah, no, Fairtick did a survey and it's fine. It's fine where it needs to be.
What have we got? We've got Ruth. Does Hail and Ride feature at all for the buses, so you can get a bus on demand, as you do in Pembrokeshire if you choose to stay at a cafe before getting on a train?
That's a great question, actually. I genuinely don't know what the Hail and Ride situation is in the Hope Valley at the moment, and I certainly don't know what it would be for this project. But it's a question for East Midlands County Combined Authority as both provider of this service and as the Highways Authority. It's a great question. I don't know the answer.
And Ruth has another question, which is getting from bus to train and in reverse. People might also have luggage, which might be in different parts of the bus. Are we talking to city type buses or coaches where luggage normally goes in the hold?
I mean, in my head, these are buses, not coaches. I think coaches would be quite tricky just in terms of journey times and loading and unloading. So in my head, these are buses. Now, obviously, it's not my project. It's East Midlands County Combined Authority to deliver now. But in my head, it's buses.
And then H has just made a couple of suggestions for things to look at, which might be relevant. One is, have you reviewed the Service 10 interconnected Lincoln Skegness service? And something happening in Strathaven and Glenfarg as well, in terms of connecting. And actually, my experience of Scotland is that the buses there are planned better, because they are more, I don't know why, but they are. Any thoughts?
Well, it's not my experience. I went on holiday to Gourock last year.
Okay.
And travelling around Argyll, the number of times you'd get to a bus stop and the ferry would have left 5 minutes after the bus had arrived, drove me up the wall. But no, There were a lot of missed connections and lots of every bus company and train company and ferry company have different rules. So what a child is and how you get a child ticket, and some require the app and some require you to buy on board. And so trying to smooth all of those edges is a really important part of this.
I must have just been lucky. And it's a good question from Wookie here. Doesn't bus punctuality depend on the variability of car traffic? Is it even possible to write a timetable that doesn't change all the time, but almost always works even on sunny bank holidays due to car congestion?
Yeah, it's almost the number one chicken and egg problem with this whole project. Obviously, we want to reduce the car congestion by giving people an alternative, but they won't use the car alternative until it's been there for a while, but they won't use it if it's unreliable, which will require, that's a nightmare. And it's really hard. Now, one of the things that the Swiss do to try and get around this is they don't really prioritize journey time. So both buses and trains will pause to catch up quite a lot. And I think that's actually really sensible, because we have a tendency to really focus on journey times, but then the connections don't meet. So you go, zoom, hang around for ages, zoom. Actually, probably better to go, zoom, 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 change, zoom, zoom, zoom. You keep moving the whole time, but at a slightly slower pace.
And like the sound effects.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, I think we're drawing to a close now. I've asked, I think, all the questions in the Q&A that haven't been picked up by yourself already. I thought I'd end with a question about it's really exciting and great to see a sort of innovation project like this actually get significant, enough funding to actually make a difference. And okay, it's not 5 years, but it is 3 years. It's not 1 year.
Absolutely, I'm not complaining.
Was this? Has this project essentially tempted the DFT to fund it, or were they thinking of doing something and you've come along and they've funded? Have you sort of persuaded them, if you like, to invest in you, or was it the other way around, that they had a sort of call for ideas and this came along?
It's a kind of bit of both. There was no defined funding pot that this was, we're going to spend some money on something, this is the project we're going to fund. But obviously it was hugely helpful that they were writing Better Connected at the time that we were developing this proposition, and therefore they were able to use this as something that was part of the Better Connected strategy. So I expect this wouldn't have happened if Better Connected hadn't happened, but they weren't actively seeking to fund something. It was, here's a thing that you can fund. And I have to all credit to the DFT officials, because, and ministers, because they were, when we took this to them, they reacted with real agility to get this funded and into the strategy. We only published this in February, and I think that, real credit to them.
Well, I think that's been a brilliant sort of canter around your project and all the types of challenges that you're clearly considering, or East Midlands Combined Authority will now be considering. Which part of the authority does it sit with?
The transport team are the ones going to be delivering this, so that's the core.
Great. Any last questions from anyone? Otherwise, I'll just finish here, and thank you very much, Thomas, for joining us. Really exciting, and good luck. I'm sure you'll stay involved even though you're not delivering it. And just remains for me to say to everyone that a reminder that we're on a break next week for half term, and if you're away at all, have a nice time. If you're working, I hope you have a nice time too. And as I said at the start, we're back the week after, which is Tuesday the 3rd of June, with Danny Williams, who was Chief Exec of Active Travel England and delivered the Better Connected strategy, and he's now going to be working out in the wild, so he's coming to talk to us about his reflections and about what's next for him. So I hope you can join us for that one. Thank you.